Today, we have a true story about a quiet valley where hundreds of families went to sleep, believing the night was completely ordinary. But before sunrise, something moved through their villages, something they could not see, hear, or escape. And by morning, more than 1,700 people were dead. If you enjoy true stories that begin in familiar places and end somewhere almost impossible to believe, then you're in the right place, because that is exactly what we do here. So please invite the like button over for a relaxing glass of sparkling water, but shake the bottle as hard as you can before handing it over. Also, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our future stories. All right, let's travel back to Cameroon. In August of 1986, 19-year-old Esther Ngong woke up on the floor of her home in northwestern Cameroon. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious. The first thing she heard was the cry of her 1-year-old niece. Then Esther began checking on the people around her. They would not wake up. As she slowly realized what had happened, the scale of it became almost impossible to understand. According to contemporary reports, of roughly 50 members of her extended family, only Esther and the baby survived. And Esther was not alone. Across the valley, other people were waking up to the same horrifying discovery. Something had happened during the night, but no one knew what. To understand what happened while Esther was unconscious, we have to go back to the evening before. Lake Nyos sits in the highlands of northwestern Cameroon, surrounded by steep green slopes and small farming communities. In 1986, many of the people living there were farmers and cattle herders. They grew crops such as rice, coffee, and cassava, raised animals, and built their daily routines around the land. The lake itself did not appear threatening. It was remote, quiet, and surrounded by beautiful countryside. Families lived in the valleys below it. Children played near their homes. Cattle grazed along the hillsides. And when the sun went down, the villages became dark and still, just as they had on countless nights before. Thursday, August 21st, began like any ordinary day. People worked in their fields, prepared meals, visited relatives, and eventually returned home for the night. There had been no major storm, no wildfire, no earthquake strong enough to send people running from their homes. There was no official warning, and no obvious reason to believe the area was in danger. By evening, Esther was with members of her family. In nearby villages, other families were settling in for the night. Nothing about that evening suggested that, by morning, entire families would be gone. Around 9 o'clock that night, in the village of Subum, Francis Gué was inside his house when he heard something unusual outside. It was the village alarm, a pulsing, yodel-like call raised by one of the residents. Francis went to the door and opened it to see what was happening. Almost immediately, he collapsed. There was no time to call for help, no time to understand what the warning meant. One moment, Francis was standing in his doorway. The next, everything disappeared. Elsewhere in the same village, the chief, Nusa Stephen Ngong, woke with the terrifying sensation that he could not breathe. He tried to make it through his doorway, but fell before he could get outside. Somehow, he forced himself back up and moved toward the bush. Then he collapsed again. These were not isolated incidents. Across the valley, people inside their homes and outside them were suddenly losing consciousness. Some appeared to have tried to escape. Others fell before they could even leave their rooms. But whatever was happening moved so quickly that no one had time to identify it, much less warn the people farther away. No one knew where the danger was coming from. There was nothing they could see approaching, nothing they could run toward and fight. And once it reached them, many had very little time before their bodies stopped responding. For Francis, Chief Ngong, Esther, and the others who would later survive, the night simply vanished. Hours passed, and when they finally opened their eyes again, the question would no longer be what had happened to them. It would be why nearly everyone around them had never woken up at all. When Esther regained consciousness the next morning, the house was almost completely silent. The only sound came from her 1-year-old niece, who was crying nearby. At first, Esther may not have understood why no one else was responding. She had been surrounded by family the night before. Now, as she tried to wake them, one person after another remained motionless. They were dead. The baby was alive. Esther was alive. But according to reports from the time, they were the only 2 survivors from an extended family of roughly 50 people. Several kilometers away, Francis Gay also woke up after collapsing in his doorway. His 9-year-old son had survived, but Francis's 2 brothers had not. Whatever had struck him had entered the same home, reached several members of the same family, and somehow left only some of them alive. Chief Ngong eventually regained consciousness as well. He had collapsed repeatedly while trying to escape his house during the night. When he was finally able to move through the village, he discovered that the disaster extended far beyond his own home. Neighbors were dead. Entire households had been wiped out. Among the victims were 2 of his own children. And the farther survivors moved through the surrounding communities, the more horrifying the situation became. People had died inside their houses, beside paths, and in the places where they had fallen while apparently trying to escape. Cattle and other animals lay dead as well. Yet there was no obvious destruction. The homes were still standing. There were no burned buildings, no collapsed walls, and no floodwaters cutting through the villages. Nothing in the landscape appeared powerful enough to explain how so many living things had died within the same few hours. This was no longer a tragedy confined to one family or one village. Whatever had happened during the night had reached people in separate homes across different parts of the valley, and no one could explain what it was. By the time help began reaching the affected villages, the scale of the disaster was becoming impossible to hide. Soldiers, medical workers, and local officials moved through communities where entire families had died overnight. Survivors who were still able to walk began leaving their homes, carrying children or helping injured relatives towards safer areas. Thousands of people would eventually be displaced. The dead were not limited to humans. Cattle lay motionless in fields and beside roads. Other livestock had collapsed near homes and grazing areas. In some places, nearly every animal that had been breathing the night before was now dead. But scattered among these scenes were survivors who seemed almost impossible to explain. At a maternity clinic in Subum, a baby only 4 days old was found alive. The infant's mother, who had reportedly been sharing the same bed, had died. So had others inside the clinic. In nearby homes, the same confusing pattern appeared again and again. One person survived while someone sleeping only a short distance away did not. A parent lived while a child died. A child survived while the adults around them never regained consciousness. There was no clear warning that separated the living from the dead. The survivors themselves often had little useful information. Many remembered feeling weak, struggling to breathe, or suddenly collapsing. Others remembered almost nothing between the previous evening and the moment they woke up. And because the buildings were still standing, investigators could not point to a conventional disaster. There was no blast site, no path of destruction, no obvious source of fire, violence, or disease. Yet the deaths were spread across multiple villages, and they had occurred within the same narrow period of time. As rescuers continued mapping where people and animals had died, they began to notice that the devastation was not distributed evenly. Some places had been almost completely wiped out. Other communities, not very far away, had been spared. The deaths appeared to follow the shape of the land, and that meant whatever had moved through the valley during the night had not moved randomly. When investigators began plotting the locations of the dead, a disturbing pattern emerged. The worst devastation was concentrated in the lower parts of the valleys beneath Lake Nyos. Villages sitting along those natural channels had suffered catastrophic losses, while some people living on higher ground had survived. The same pattern appeared among the animals. Cattle in low fields and depressions were found dead. Animals farther uphill were more likely to have escaped whatever had passed through the area. That made several explanations increasingly difficult to accept. An infectious disease would not have killed so many people and animals within the same few hours. Food or contaminated water could not explain why separate households had collapsed almost simultaneously. And there was no evidence of the kind of explosion, fire, or violent eruption that should have left buildings damaged and the landscape torn apart. The destruction followed the terrain, but it had not damaged the terrain. Whatever entered those villages seemed to have moved downhill, flowing through the lowest parts of the land and settling in places where people and animals were sleeping. It also appeared to have disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. By the time rescuers entered the area, there was no visible cloud hanging over the villages and no obvious substance covering the ground. The danger that had killed so many living things had left behind almost nothing that could be collected, photographed, or pointed to. But the survivors' experiences offered one more clue. Many had struggled to breathe before losing consciousness. Some had collapsed within moments of opening a door or stepping outside. Others had no memory of feeling ill at all. Their bodies had simply stopped responding. Investigators were now looking for something that could move through a valley, remain close to the ground, overwhelm anyone who breathed it, and then vanish without damaging a single building. And when they traced the path of the deaths back through the landscape, nearly every line led toward the same place, Lake Nyos. As scientists turned their attention toward Lake Nyos, they discovered something deeply unsettling. This was not the first time a lake in Cameroon had been connected to a mass death. 2 years earlier, in August 1984, 37 people had died near another lake called Manoun. The victims had collapsed along a low-lying road, and investigators eventually concluded that some kind of suffocating gas had escaped from the lake. Now the same pattern had appeared again, only on a far greater scale. Researchers began testing the water at Lake Nyos, especially far beneath the surface. What they found changed the entire investigation. Deep underground, carbon dioxide was slowly seeping upward through volcanic rock and entering the bottom of the lake. Normally, carbon dioxide escapes into the atmosphere. But Lake Nyos was unusually deep and strongly layered. Its cold, dense bottom water rarely mixed with the warmer water above it, so the gas remained trapped. Under the enormous pressure at the bottom of the lake, more and more carbon dioxide dissolved into the water, accumulating silently over time. The lake had become something like a sealed bottle of soda. As long as the gas-rich water remained deep and pressurized, it could appear completely stable. But if some of that water began rising toward the surface, the pressure around it would decrease. The dissolved gas would form bubbles, making the water even more buoyant and pulling still more gas-rich water upward. That could create a runaway reaction. Water rose, pressure dropped, gas escaped, and the escaping gas drove even more water toward the surface. Scientists still cannot say with absolute certainty what initiated that process on the night of August 21st. It may have begun with a disturbance in the lake, but the precise trigger remains uncertain. What happened next is much clearer. An enormous quantity of carbon dioxide erupted from the water and spilled over the edge of the lake. Because carbon dioxide is denser than ordinary air, it did not simply rise and disperse, it sank. The invisible cloud poured downhill through the surrounding valleys, pushing breathable air away as it reached the villages below. People who inhaled it lost consciousness. In areas where the concentration was high enough, they suffocated within minutes. The lake had not poisoned their water, it had poisoned the air. By the time the full scale of the disaster became clear, at least 1,700 people were dead. Thousands of cattle and other livestock had also been killed, and entire communities had been torn apart in a single night. For the survivors, understanding what had happened did not make the loss easier. Esther had awakened beside one living child, only to learn that nearly everyone else in her extended family was gone. Francis had survived with his son, but lost 2 brothers. Chief Ngong had lived long enough to walk through a village where neighbors, friends, and 2 of his own children had died. And the danger inside Lake Nyos had not simply disappeared. Carbon dioxide continued entering the deepest water from below. If enough of it accumulated again, scientists feared the lake could eventually produce another deadly release. So engineers developed a way to slowly remove the gas before it could reach dangerous levels. Beginning in 2001, pipes were installed deep into the lake. Once gas-rich water was drawn upward, the falling pressure caused the carbon dioxide to bubble out, forcing a column of water high above the surface. It was, in effect, a controlled version of the same process that had caused the disaster, but released gradually instead of all at once. The system greatly reduced the immediate threat, though the lake still requires monitoring because carbon dioxide continues to enter it from underground. Today, Lake Nyos can look completely ordinary. Its water is calm. Green hills surround it. From the shore, there is little to suggest that this beautiful place once released an invisible cloud that moved through the valleys below and killed almost everything in its path. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part. On the night of August 21st, 1986, the danger was not something the villagers could see approaching. It had been building beneath the water, silently, for years. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And remember, we have a whole playlist of places you can't go. Episodes ready for you to binge right now. So go ahead and click here and give them a watch.